It won't be an issue in 1900, he thought. He was completely wrong, especially with the economy getting better, partially because of more gold being discovered. And the panic was 1893, so they'd gone through a 6-year depression. So that's the actual vote total how it went. And all the ones here, here, and here voted for the treaty. And this cartoon shows him as a jester by 1900. Judge was very much pro-McKinley. And it really hurt him, really hurt Brian. His reputation never got back. He's still going to be one of the most important politicians in American history, but he'll run for president 2 more times and never win. Actually do slightly worse each time. So sometimes the vote count doesn't necessarily mean your importance. And so 1901, 1903, a series of court cases came about this new empire. And the question was a question that really wasn't resolved when the U.S. spread westward after the founding of the country. Does the Constitution follow the flag? Meaning, does the native population have rights? The Bill of Rights. Does it apply to the people who live in Hawaii? Does it apply to people who live in the Philippines?
Sorry, I have a Valentine's Day delivery for Connor. It's all of it, yes.
Which?
This one?
Is it yours?
Yeah. It is.
Okay, Bill of Rights, and here it shows the Philippines and another horribly prejudiced picture. I mean, these are so common meant to be funny. And so the big thing is when it comes right down to it, can the people decide their own fate? AKA, can there be democracy in an empire? And here's the thing, that clearly did not happen here. The population here did not get the rights. Oh, sure, the settlers who came in and took the land had the rights, but not the people who lived there. That's what the Supreme Court ruled. No. And this is going to be a truism of empire that everybody who was opposed to empire from the beginning said. Empires, by definition, are anti-democratic. Because if they were democratic, the people of, let's say, the Philippines would say, the first thing we vote on is making the United States leave. Empires cannot be democratic. And this is a truism no matter where an empire happens. And so the Supreme Court would rule with this, and this would be crucial. That means in these colonies, constitutional rights do not apply. This might have implications in, let's say, I'm going to throw a time period out, your lifetime. So the Platt Amendment would be passed by the United States Congress in 1903 to decide what the U.S. would do with the newly independent Cuba. And remember, Cuba's independent. They're independent by, we're going to tell them, you must be a protectorate. You must be a protectorate. So we forced Cuba to sign a treaty where they would have no treaties, no trade rights, nothing with any other country except the United States. The United States did not ask Cuba, hey, what's the best thing for you? They dictated to them, and this cartoon kind of shows it, like encouraging the child as little Cuba trying to create independence, and there's the United States telling them what to do. And so they will not be independent. I repeat, this was the United States dictating to an independent country, supposedly. Next, the U.S. can intervene in Cuba anytime they want. Intervene means send in, well, the Marines. Naval infantry will be perfect, and the Marines are going to be greatly expanded in this time period to what we know as the Marines today. Why? To intervene in countries. Next, the U.S. is going to have to lease a naval base on the eastern side, a big undeveloped bay called Guantanamo. It was a 99-year lease, but after 99 years, the U.S. just said, we're staying, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so this is a base on a colony. And it's to not only to dictate to Cuba, but also as a presence for the rest of the Caribbean. And you might think, wait a minute, we already have a presence in the Caribbean, Florida, and the rest of the Gulf Coast. But right here, along with Puerto Rico, will dominate this area. Will dominate. So when the United States got involved in a civil war in Afghanistan after the September 11th attack, there was not an invasion per se. There was a civil war, we picked a side, and then we stayed until your lifetime, the United States left. Well, this is why after the September 11th attack, there's a civil war going on. Al-Qaeda was involved in one of the sides called the Taliban. Very complex story of Afghani history that, or Afghanis, Afghans, what they have gone through. Afghanis, the currency, I'm sorry. But, yes, we know it's a flower. And the United States started getting prisoners. And the U.S. had no idea who might have been involved in the September 11th attack. We didn't know anything. And people were just turning over enemies. It was chaos. What are you doing? Well, we didn't have, there was no prison in Guantanamo Bay. It was a big naval base. But the decision was, we're going to take it back and interrogate them. Well, in the United States, they have rights. But because of the insular cases, it is a gray area. People have rights in these territories. So they made a prison in Guantanamo Bay so they could take them for one reason, because the prisoners have no rights. And therefore, what could the United States government, aka us, do to them? Torture them, including the water torture. Tortured. And yes, one prisoner would be tortured over 100 times to give him the water torture. Which in World War II, 80 Japanese officers were executed for war crimes for doing the water torture on Allied prisoners. And the U.S. did it in your lifetime. In your lifetime. The U.S. meaning us. We did that. It's still a prison there. Why? Because of the insular cases. Now, the Supreme Court would later rule say, no, they have rights. And the Bush administration who did it would finally quit. They're no longer technically tortured. And it turned out virtually everybody brought there had nothing to do with terrorism. They're in prison wrongly. Virtually every one of them. And tortured wrong. Not a proud moment. Lastly, Cuba. No excessive public spending or excessive debt. And so they can only tax so much, they can only issue so many bonds. And the reason for that was, they might claim, we want fiscal responsibility for the Cubans. No, it's to make sure that creditors, aka American banks, will always get their money back. And the United States is going to intervene 6 times total, 4 times, 6, what am I saying, 7 times total in Cuba, 4 times totally come in and take or get rid of the government, put in a new government to make sure American banks are going to be repaid. Here is a Cuban cartoon showing American occupation of Cuba. And it's McKinley branding Cuba. And this would be a pretty common cartoon all the way through to relatively recently. You can imagine how Cuba felt about the Platt Amendment. This was their big neighbor dictating to them what's going to go on. And what type of governments did the United States want in Cuba? I heard whispers. What kind? Not even puppets. Not even. What's stronger than that? Dictatorships. We want. Did you say dictatorships? No. Oh. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. We want dictatorships. Why? Because if the people vote, they will vote for things like they can't intervene. We want to vote to make treaties. We want spending on things that we want as a country to spend on. Yeah.
Aren't we terribly Cuba? Does he have a dictatorship now?
Yes.
How does that work?
And so, with that, yeah, you just saw a big problem, haven't you? Yeah, we support dictatorships all over the world.
What?
Yeah. Wait till we get to the Cold War. We really like, and this is going to be a real problem, because if you support dictatorships, you might look like a hypocrite. Like one of our closest allies is Saudi Arabia, and it's one of the most brutal dictatorships. And almost all the 9/11 attackers were from Saudi Arabia. Oh yeah, we're going to have problems. We will get to that. But that was part of the reason why Castro was so popular, because he kicked out the Americans. Now, Castro had a lot of problems, but he kicked out the Americans. All right. Now, why am I telling you this like this? There are reasons why sometimes people might not totally like the United States. And it's complex. It doesn't mean that they're always right, and it doesn't mean they can't solve their own problems. But wait till we get to Iran. So, here's showing America and Cuba. So this is another political cartoon. What country had these cartoons? The United States. They don't care what Cuba thinks. They're trying to sell this policy to the United States. So look at the face of Cuba, look at all the Cubans, and it's implying your public schools, large cane crop, and the United States did do some of this, without a doubt, and help with this out. But look at the faces. They're trying to persuade the Americans. Remember, we're dictating to the Cubans what's going to happen to them. We want Americans to agree. And so if the peace treaty was ratified, Cuba's solved, is there something a little bit maybe off about that headline?
Awful slaughter.
Peace treaty ratified, awful slaughter. The Philippines. The Filipinos were very upset that the United States came in not to liberate, but to colonize. The Filipino insurrection, even though more properly it should be called the Filipino War. But I called it the Filipino insurrection. That's what it's normally called. By the way, do you notice the fun with the English language? First off, how do you spell Philippines? PH. But Filipino, F. Secondly, what's that a picture of? Those are Filipino civilians that were executed by American soldiers. The United States is soon going to do the exact same thing that Spain did. Why? That's empire. That's what countries do in empire. Now, you might say, how could they do this? Do you remember we talked about the Battle of Sand Creek? Do you remember Wounded Knee? Empire. This is empire. This is why George Washington warned against them, even though he did some of this on his own in the war. So the justification for this imperial war was we're bringing civilization and Christianity. The word was gone. And here it's implying with the eyes of the world are upon McKinley, they can't let Philippines go over the cliff of more Spanish misrule. But look at how they draw the Philippines. Now, civilization and trade and commerce. I must add, commerce was key. Meaning American companies come in, but more importantly, Christianity. McKinley would say, after the fact, part of the reason he so wanted the Philippines and wanted to become part of the empire, part of the United States, was to bring Christianity to the Filipinos. In fact, he said he had a dream where he received a message from God who told him to bring Christianity to the Filipinos. Now, what language or what religion were 95% of the Filipinos? They were Catholic. Spain made them Catholic. And so McKinley's saying, I'm going to bring Christianity to the Christians. Huh? You're right, the 5%. And now it's about 10% are Muslim. Now, why did McKinley say this? Now, McKinley might not have a clue. McKinley was not the sharpest knife. But he's not talking to the Filipinos. He's assuming what about the American public? They want to spread that, right? And what is the knowledge that the American people have of the Philippines? Nothing. They know nothing about the Philippines. They're assuming the Americans know nothing, and were they right? Unfortunately, yeah. That's nothing to be really proud of. They didn't know. So they just, oh yeah, look out. There can't be Christians because all these cartoons are saying. The cartoons are reinforcing that. I mean, I can still remember in 2003. So you weren't quite born yet, right? You're still a few years away, right? The United States invaded Iraq. And polls were having 70% of the American public believe that Iraq was behind the September 11th attack. And that's why we're invading. Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with the September 11th attack. In fact, the dictator of Iraq despised Al-Qaeda. the people who did the attack. And yet we attacked and invaded Iraq. And the Bush administration wanted to invade, so they kind of hinted at it and let people just assume because, I don't know, they had no idea. And so we invaded Iraq. It was a disaster, but we invaded. We will get to that too. That would be in May. Right for the exam. Are you excited? Good. So, Emilio Alganado. No, the point is, be very wary of what people tell you. Even me, I know. He was the leader of the freedom fighters. He was a guerrilla leader, a former teacher. He'd been fighting against the Spanish, and now he started fighting against the Americans. They had used guerrilla tactics. We know anything about the Philippines. You have 1,000 islands, but the big thing is it's really mountains and jungle. I guess, ever been there? Beautiful. But these are going to be bloody fights. And eventually the United States is going to send 270,000 troops. Not all at one time, but be rotated in. Remember the size of the American army when the war began was 28,000? Empire, now you need a bigger army. One more thing's going to come with empire, you need spies. We'll get to the CIA after World War II. And here's a great cartoon because casualties began to go up very heavily, lots of Montanans. And you see early on in the war, they were in the navy blue. They would switch to khaki in this war. American soldiers would start wearing khaki up until the 1930s because they needed a little better camouflage. World War II, they go to drab, green, olive drab. So there was a game, it'd be a fairground, pretty horrible game, but it'd be at fairs, carnivals would go through town. Traveling carnivals were a big deal at this time. And imagine a tent, and in the tent there'd be a hole in it, and somebody would stick their face, and you would pay money to throw like tomatoes or eggs, or think about worst things you can throw, and try to hit them in the face. And it was almost always, these small towns, and it would almost always be a black man that they'd throw at. I mean, horribly, this is 1900. So it's doing the same game. So here's Agmanado sticking through. And here's Uncle Sam throwing American troops, and look at this. Throwing more and more men. A game that loses much to win. That's a pretty darn good cartoon. And you notice here's McKinley and Hanna cheering. Now, most of the deaths were kept secret, so 1900 election would not be affected by this, but after the election, they started getting through the War Department tried to censor all the information, but it started to come out. We'll get to the war about that. And about 10 times that was moved. So significantly more died in the Philippine insurrection, which is part 2 of the Spanish-American War. So here's more cartoons. And look how they draw Aguinaldo. The one on the left is bad. This is kind of shocking. And they would use the N-word all the time to describe the Filipinos. All the time in this war. Remember that one, that word goes back to slavery. That one goes back to slaves who were not civilized and did not know their place. And it's shocking. But this was pretty common. Now, don't forget, this is not to the Philippines. This is to the American population to dehumanize them, to imply they're a bunch of barbarians and animals and can't govern themselves. Don't forget, cartoons are meant for, the ones I show you, for the US audience, unless I specifically tell you. And it went into this horrible cycle of ambush, American soldiers being ambushed. Very few prisoners are going to take. And then, think about it. You're an American soldier in this, can't speak the language, can never relax because you don't know who the enemy is. Everyone looks like the enemy to you because you're thrown into the middle of this place that you're a stranger. You're terrified all the time, can never relax. And then you find one of your friends hacked apart by a machete because there's no prisoners in this. What is your first impulse? Yeah. And then they're going to start going into towns like this. This is a reprisal after attack. Towns where they think they might be helping the guerrillas, burn it down. Yes, people would be killed. They started using concentration camps, just like the Greek concentration camps, and just repeat. That's a reprisal. So here's guerrilla attack on a US base, want to prevent, reprisal, repeat. These wars are horrific. You saw elements of this in the American West, but it's even more pronounced here, especially because of the tighter urban areas. So Penang was one of the most famous reprisals, a city in Luzon, island of Luzon. There was an ambush against American soldiers, and a number of them were hacked apart with machetes. Oh, no problem. And General Jacob Smith, who was a Marine general, he ordered everybody over the age of 10 in the nearest village of Penang to be killed by American soldiers. And so they lined them up row by row and mowed them down. Here they are. Now, a horrible war crime, especially the commanding officer committed this, but you're asking for it almost. If you put people under stress that I could never imagine, what are they going to do? And eventually you lose control. And you're going to see this, other wars like this too. These are just nightmares. I mean, the one ultimately responsible were the people who put them in. And the poor Filipino population. Oh, and then this is water torture that the United States began to use. That's it. They even put it on the cover of the brand new, it was kind of a photography magazine, news magazine called Life, but they have it drawn water torture. The Israelis started calling it waterboarding because it violated a treaty that Israel signed saying no torture. So they took the word torture, or called it boarding, and now therefore it's not torture. They started doing it in the 80s. And the point is empire. And this is exactly what people like Washington want. So one of those things you can't escape. And it's a horrible crime, but I'm empathetic. I understand. You put people in horrible situations and they do sometimes horrible things. We're going to jump right to them. The war was going horribly. But then Teddy Roosevelt, when he became president, replaced the governor. There were two different military governors and put in a former judge by the name of William Howard Taft. And Taft didn't want to do it. But Roosevelt said, I need you, kind of like my fireman. Taft went there and immediately started to talk about, hey, we don't want this to end. We will let you have self-government. And yes, that is Taft riding a water buffalo. Yes, I know, that picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, they finally, and Taft would become president, and after president would become a member of the Supreme Court. The only president to do that, kind of amazing. So they finally came up with a peace agreement. And this would end colonial imperialism in the United States. Not economic, but colonial. All Grenada was captured, partially by luck, partially by subterfuge, and could kind of set up a meeting. And they agreed to self-rule. They said, we will let you have your own government. There'll be a president of the Philippines, you'll have your own legislature. We will just be, you'll be more like a protectorate. And you will be independent on July 4th, 1946. So when World War II began, the Philippines was in a very important strategic position for the Japanese. So they took that colony, 41, 42. The U.S. would retake the colony in 44, 45, but the U.S. stuck to their word, and in 1946, the Philippines became independent. I should add, it's kind of a difficult relationship between the United States and the Philippines. You know, last year I just read an article about when the Philippines was moving closer for various reasons to the United States. And people involved were saying, but I also remember the Filipino insurrection. Family members, we see monuments about it all over, and what happened during that. And it's very complex, like in Hawaii too. So this is the price, over 5,000 dead. The United States was getting 20,000 insurgents killed. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard. You know, what's an insurgent look like? Was that everybody else? But at least 250,000 civilians, partially because cholera that spread through the concentration camps. Yeah, this is the price of empire. And this is something that people could have warned, but of course you could have seen in the American West. And yes, the United States would, in the Philippines, invest money, help build roads, railroads, got to build schools, but there's also a price. The Philippine insurrection was really a nasty taste of what's to come. We will get to it all through Big Stick, the Vietnam War, and then your lifetime, Iraq and Afghanistan. So, with that, while that's going on, we have an election. The presidential election of 1900. And McKinley's going to run for re-election again. And McKinley really pushed this idea that promises kept. In 1896, while the panic was going on in Cleveland, the Democrat was president, we have shut down factories, a bank panic, a run on the bank, and Spanish rule in Cuba. You notice it's a jail. But after 4 years, prosperity when you've gone Republican, a run to the bank, meaning people trust the banking industry again, and American rule, and of course you got to show a school. And it says, the American flag has not been planted on foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake. That kind of white man's burden argument. But then you might notice something else. A new choice for vice president. Teddy Roosevelt was so famous after, well, supposedly San Juan Hill, that he ran for governor of New York in 1898 and swept in as governor. And now Teddy Roosevelt will be the governor of the biggest, the wealthiest, and most industrial state. So has everyone got that? Teddy Roosevelt is governor of New York. Who's the boss of the Republican machine? Hanna didn't want Roosevelt as governor. Write this. Roosevelt was a progressive. Okay, I'm stopping right there. I didn't leave you much time. I said I'd leave you time, but it took a little while to go over my mistake that irritated me so much. So everyone take out the jungle very quickly that I gave on Friday. Does anyone not have the... I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to give you a little bit of time on Thursday and Friday. Now, I will give you time tomorrow to work on this too. I promise. Can you trust me? The answer is probably not. I give it on Monday?
Yeah, it's due tomorrow.
No, it's going to be due on Friday. I originally going to do it on Thursday. I make it due on Friday. So everyone look at the jungle. You have to do two things with the jungle. There are questions. 3, 4, let me look again, 6, 8, 9 on a separate sheet. But also as you do it, I would like you to underline, especially in the jungle, just as you read it, underline examples of cutthroat competition. Underline examples of how they're trying to cut costs. And what we're doing here is this answers the cry for the progressive idea of regulation. That capitalism is effective, but it needs to be regulated, controlling monopolies and controlling cutthroat competition, where they cut costs to make horrible working conditions or cut costs to make shoddy products. Now that was part of the reason we watched the Triangle Shirtwaist fire, to get into what the progressives were thinking. Because the progressives are writing this, or the progressives are thinking, if we don't do something about bad materials, working conditions, and monopolies, there'll be a revolution. So we have to control this. Yeah. You don't need to answer them, or just kind of underline them. But you have to do 3, 4, 6, 8, 9. Yeah. No, just sentences though. So one you could, there are a couple you might need a few sentences. One you can have 1 or 2 sentences. Pen, that's got to be sentences. It's got to be in pen. It's sentences. And one more thing. Sinclair was not a populist. I'm sorry, was not a progressive. He was not this middle-class reformer that the progressives were. Sinclair was a socialist. And he was using this to prove, his book, The Jungle, to prove that capitalism was inherently flawed. But the people who read it were progressives, middle class. Upton Sinclair said, I thought I was aiming for their heart. and I hit their stomach. And if you read it, you'll know what I mean. All right, next. I will give you more time of this in class, but we're gonna do something a little bit different for, the thing about the progressives, there's just a ton of laws. And so you're gonna have to kind of do that on your own, and that's why we're doing out of the review book, chapter 21. I originally signed a reading, but I'm just gonna sign the whole thing. Yeah, no. And I'll give you time in class. And so I'll give you all period on Monday to do this. Because we're not gonna be in school Monday. So Tuesday, it's President's. But it's chapter 21 of the review. Yeah, well, I'll do it at the end of the period. I'll give you the whole period. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll make it due Wednesday. You have the whole, you're right, it's due tomorrow. Today's Wednesday, isn't it? So it's due now. So, on the jungle, when you read this, think in terms of, they're trying to cut costs, they're trying to make money, how do they do this? Why are they doing this? And don't forget, social Darwinism was kind of involved in everything. All right, so I will finish this last little bit up tomorrow. Oh, yeah. Oh, you have, yeah. I'm giving you a lot of time on this, but I want to give you now. Yeah.
I know. Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
All right, so tomorrow I'll finish up in loose ends, give you a little bit of time, and then go from there.
Oh my God.